Hey there, lovely. If you're a driven and highly ambitious woman who has checked all the boxes, followed all the rules, only to realize you don't actually feel fulfilled or you don't feel like you're living your purpose, then you are absolutely in the right place. My name is Melissa Chavis. I'm an intuitive mindset coach, and I am absolutely obsessed with helping you discover your true purpose, that thing you were put here on this earth to do, so that you can live the most fulfilling and abundant life possible. Hey there, beautiful. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Awakening podcast. If you've been around for a while, you're probably thinking that my hair looks different today. And it's because I literally just came back from the salon getting it done. So you will never see my hair look like this ever again because it's literally been professionally styled, which only happens when I go and get my hair done. So this is the best that you'll probably ever see my hair look on this show. But anyway, I want to talk about a topic today that if you are following me over on Instagram, you may have seen a post. It's been within the last few weeks that I did. I actually reposted another creator's content on this topic because I felt like it would really, really resonate with a lot of my followers. And it turns out that it did. So I figure that this may resonate for you as well. You're here listening to this podcast. The concept that I want to talk about today is something that is kind of being referred to as good girl syndrome. Now, obviously, this is not an actual illness per se, nothing diagnosable, but I think we can all kind of have some understanding of what is meant by the term good girl syndrome. So I felt like it would be a helpful topic to cover here and just kind of go into a little bit more detailed conversation on this topic to see maybe if this is something that has been playing out in your life. I know for me, it totally resonated for me and definitely is something that has been happening in my life. So I just wanted to kind of take a little bit deeper dive today. I want to start with what is the generally accepted definition of good girl syndrome, and that is holding a set of beliefs and behaviors rooted in societal expectations of women to prioritize being agreeable, compliant, and selfless, often at the expense of their authenticity and well-being. What really struck me here on this definition was the authenticity piece. Obviously, this show is called Authentic Awakening. And so the whole idea, the whole concept is coming back to this true authenticity and relearning how to be your most authentic self. And so when I read this definition, I'm like, yeah, this is definitely something that can take away from that authenticity, can kind of take away from you truly ever knowing yourself on this deeper level. So I have found that many of us highly successful, rule following, box checking women end up falling into this good girl syndrome category or being susceptible to these types of beliefs and behaviors. So I just wanted to kind of start by answering some questions about this, things that I think can come up as we start to look into what really does this mean and how is it really going to impact my life, essentially. First, what are some signs or symptoms that you may be suffering from good girl syndrome? Some of the more common behaviors you might notice are things like people pleasing, a fear of saying no, or sometimes even over apologizing for things when you do maybe assert yourself a little bit in the situation. A lot of these behaviors come from this fear of being seen as difficult or this desire to prioritize the other person's feelings over your own, even if it means agreeing to something that you don't necessarily want to do, or agreeing with an opinion that you don't necessarily agree with, just to be liked or sort of included. A lot of these behaviors are associated with emotions like guilt or shame or fear of disapproval. There are just these feelings of guilt truly that you can feel if you think that maybe something you said or something you did upset someone around you. There's this real need of, people pleasing, this real desire to make sure that the people around you like you or have a good impression of you, essentially. The next question is, where does this come from? And I think, we have this general sense that it comes from these societal and cultural expectations that we as women kind of have grown up with. We are very aware that culturally, women are seen as being more submissive, and this idea that we need to focus on pleasing people around us or, you know, not being too loud, never really putting up a fight for anything or putting up too much of a fuss around anything. And, if you're anything like me, you probably grew up hearing people say things like, either you're such a good girl or be a good girl. And when we hear phrases like that, we know exactly what is meant by that. It's like, don't be too difficult, don't be too loud, don't break any rules, don't get anyone's way. And sort of just the sense that you need to kind of be seen and not heard, and that you need to leave a good impression on the people around you. And that is how you be a good girl. And if you're anything like me, like I said, you grew up hearing this. And even today, at this point, I hear people say it and I just cringe because it's like, oh, I know what's behind that. And I know what it can do to constantly have these reminders that you need to be a good girl. But I think to go even a little bit deeper, as I was thinking about this topic, I think that for some of us who are just intrinsically motivated, we intrinsically care about achieving and being successful, I think we might be more likely to grab onto some of these expectations because we perceive meeting others' expectations as, in some ways, achieving something or being successful in some way. And so I think some of us are just much more likely to kind of latch on to these societal or cultural expectations of us and try to meet them because we have this desire to be successful. We have this desire to achieve. And so when we feel that way, when that is just how we're made, it can be really easy to start, trying to live up to other people's expectations. And I think that that's why we can see this starting at such a young age for some of us, because we just felt from a very young age that we needed to achieve, we needed to be successful. And this was kind of a goalpost that we could put out there. This was a way that we could achieve something, we could be successful in something, is to kind of meet others' expectations. And we got praise for it and accolades. And it was like, you're such a good girl, you're doing such a good job, kind of thing, right? So I do think that there is something within some of us that lends itself to kind of getting into these types of beliefs and behaviors more so than other people. Okay, so the next question is, how can you tell if this is affecting your life today as a full-grown adult? I think some questions that you might want to ask yourself are things like, do I tend to avoid conflict at all costs, or do I often prioritize other people's needs over my own? And even something like, do I have a clear answer when I ask myself, do I know what I really want? Or do I actually know what brings me joy in life? Because I think if you are in these types of behaviors and patterns throughout your entire life, you can get so externally focused and so focused on the things that you're meant to be doing and these expectations that you're meant to be meeting that you forget to ever focus internally. You forget to ever focus on yourself and what you actually want in life, or what actually makes you happy, or what things do you actually like. You get so focused on being agreeable to other people that you may not even know like what your likes or dislikes truly are. These patterns can also show up in things like being the go-to person at work. I know for me, I spent years being that person of like, if you wanted to get something done, you could ask Melissa to do it. And of course, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take it on, even if I'm completely overwhelmed, even if it's totally not in my job description. It's like, well, this thing needs to get done. So, this person asked me to do it. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to follow through and make sure that it gets done. And people start to know that, and word gets around, and you end up being kind of that go-to person in whatever situation, right? Another thing that can happen is in relationships, whether those are just friend relationships or romantic relationships. Do you tend to just sort of go along with whatever the other person wants to do? Like, even if it's not necessarily something that sounds exciting or sounds fun for you, you just kind of say, oh, whatever, this is what they want to do. So I'm just going to go along with it and prioritize kind of their wants and desires over my own. One of the things that, I've definitely seen happen is your partner suggests going to watch a certain new action movie, and you're just like, I have really no interest in action movies. That doesn't even sound appealing to me, but you just kind of go along with it because it's what they want to do. And you just think like you just truly believe that, well, this is what they want to do. So I'm going to do it for them and do it with them because that's what they want to do, without ever even considering like, this isn't really what I want to do. I'm just gonna not do it, or just say no thanks, like not interested in that. It's like it doesn't even occur to you to kind of stand up for that and say like, no, I don't really want to. So if you kind of notice things like that happening, then there's a good chance that good girl syndrome is impacting your life in some way today. I think a really big question, an important question to answer is, why does any of this matter? Why is it important to even recognize these types of behaviors or patterns in my life? And I think really it's because what we want to know is like, what are the costs of actually staying stuck in these patterns? Because I do believe that there are costs to you as an individual of staying in this place. And so in order to get yourself out of it, you first need to recognize that you're in it, that these are beliefs that you hold, that these are behavior patterns that you are displaying in your life. The only way you can change something is if you first recognize that it's happening. And so I think really that is kind of the question, is like, what are the costs of actually staying in these behaviors and holding on to these beliefs? Because that's why it matters, because there are costs associated with staying there. And so it's important to understand and acknowledge that this is something that's happening for you. These types of behaviors and beliefs can lead to things like burnout or resentment in your relationships, a lack of fulfillment in your life, and ultimately just feeling very disconnected from your true self. What I hear often is just this general sense of like, this isn't what I want in my life. I'm just realizing that all the things that I have going on around me aren't actually what I want. They might be what all the other people around me want, but it's just not what I want. This isn't the life that I'm meant to be living. And it can kind of start out with that type of recognition or realization that things are misaligned for you. This just isn't authentic. And I think if you're here listening to this podcast, that is something that you desire is more authenticity and more alignment in your life, a life that actually feels good, actually feels exciting for you. And that type of life is completely possible. But first, you need to get out of these types of behaviors and these beliefs and patterns. So for me, it was kind of all of the above. I mean, it really it started with a lot of burnout and not understanding why I was just so exhausted and disinterested in kind of the work that I was doing, or even in hobbies or interests that I had had previously. There was just this level of disinterest that developed and just felt really like disconnected and felt like this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing here. This isn't the life that I'm meant to be living. And not necessarily understanding what that even meant or why I was feeling that way, but it got to the point where I really was like, I need to figure this out. I need to figure out how to stop feeling this way because it didn't feel good. And continuing to move through life in the way that I was just didn't feel like it was an option for me anymore. And I was resentful of my spouse. I was resentful of colleagues, for people, as I saw it, always taking advantage of me and always kind of like, oh, we all always do things the way that you want to do them. Or, at work with colleagues, it's like you basically always throw crap on my plate. Like I'm always getting everything that nobody else wants to do. You're always basically leaning on me to make sure that things get done. And I felt very upset about it and very resentful of people in my life until I finally realized what was going on, essentially. When I finally recognized and acknowledged that it's because of the way that I had been behaving and the things that I had been doing, seemingly just like subconsciously. I mean, this was just the way that I was. This was just how I thought I was supposed to be, right? And so that acknowledgement, that understanding of what was going on was truly the catalyst for me creating massive changes in my life. And so I definitely think that holding on to these types of beliefs and behavior patterns over time, there is a negative impact. It does impact you. And so it is important to recognize what's going on and to acknowledge it and to find a way to move out of it. Okay, finally. So if you are sitting here and you've made it this far into this episode and you're thinking, yeah, this is me. Like I'm definitely feeling this. This is definitely happening in my life. And even if you've recognized it before, you've kind of identified with this term, good girl syndrome, but you're finally understanding that this can truly impact your life in so many ways and sort of across the board can be impacting your life potentially pretty negatively. And so you're thinking, okay, so how do I get out of this? How do I stop doing this? How do I stop being the good girl all the time? Well, first thing I would say, which if you've been listening to me for any period of time, you already know I'm going to say, start with some journaling. Start with just getting your thoughts and your feelings out in front of you and creating a level of awareness that you may not have had previously, which is what journaling does. Essentially, it helps you create this awareness around your thoughts, your beliefs, your behavior patterns that maybe you haven't fully recognized before. It just gives you a different perspective on it and helps you kind of see it, acknowledge it, and start moving through it a little bit. Another thing that I think you can do is start practicing saying no. I was recently just asked to contribute to a newsletter around New Year's resolutions and kind of my thoughts on them and sort of different aspects. It was kind of a Q&A section. And one of the things I said would be a great practice for New Year's resolutions is to start letting things fall off your plate. See if there's anything that you can deprioritize this year, anything that you can just let go of to start the new year out, to create some just space in your life and a little bit more freedom for you. And so this is very similar in saying no more frequently. Even if it feels a little scary to do it at first, I would highly recommend that you practice saying no. You can start with small things like decline the invitation to the birthday party for your kids when you already have 15 other things going on that weekend. It's okay. You don't have to try to fit it in. Don't volunteer to help out with that event at your kid's school next week. There are going to be plenty of parents who really want and have the time to go in and volunteer for that, or who still might feel obligated to do it. And so don't have the time, don't really want to, but they still feel obligated. Just don't volunteer. If it feels like too much, if it's like overwhelming to think about how you might fit something else into your schedule, just don't do it. Practice saying no. The next thing I think is a little bit more challenging and a little bit deeper here, and that is to really start listening to your gut, start listening to your own intuition and actually following it. Because I think one of the things that we can do sometimes is to hear it. We hear or we feel the no or the I don't think so, like that doesn't sound right, or I'm not interested in that, that comes up when presented with something in our lives, but we override it. We just think like, oh, well, but they really want to do it, so I'm just going to do it anyway, because we're people pleasing and wanting to make sure that everybody else around us is happy. But start listening to your gut, start listening to that intuition because it's there. We all have it. And so start paying more attention and actually following it, doing what it says you really should do in that situation. Of course, one of my favorite options is to enlist the support of a coach. Someone who's truly able to just sit and listen to you and reflect back to you what they're hearing and what they're seeing in having a conversation with you. Someone who is truly there to hold that space for you to start to explore and work through some of these feelings and thoughts and beliefs and all of that that are going to start coming up. Someone who understands how to question these things, knows what questions to ask when you are diving into the various topics and the various beliefs and thoughts that might be coming up. When you're working with a coach, this person has experience specifically in helping other people work through these types of situations. They have experience in how to get from this place of feeling fully stuck in good girl syndrome to breaking free from it and being more authentic and feeling like your life is more aligned. Like that is what we're here to do. That is how we help. And so working with a coach can be a great option. when you start to dive into topics like this and start to really focus on that awareness, that acceptance, and that accountability that needs to happen for you to move out of it. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful for you today, and hopefully this just brings a little bit more awareness to this topic, this kind of concept that we've been hearing about recently, or I've been hearing about recently. But I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I would love to hear your feedback. And if this is something that resonates with you, it really is a phenomenon that is happening and has happened for so many of us in our lives. I highly encourage you to take some time today to really think about this and reflect on the things that we have discussed here. One of the first steps to changing anything in your life is to understand your current situation, to understand what is my starting point, what is currently going on in my life, where am I currently with my beliefs and my thoughts and my behavior patterns, to just have that awareness. That is kind of the baseline. Like that's where you have to start with any sort of self-development work, or if you want to make changes in a certain area of your life, you need to have an understanding of your starting point, right? And the best way to do that is through tons of reflection and getting curious and really diving into your current thoughts, feelings, beliefs, behaviors, all of that. If you would like to chat more about this one-on-one, definitely send me a DM. I am at Melissa Ann Chavis on Instagram. I will always put that down in the details underneath the show. Reach out, send me a DM. We can chat. Let me know. I would be more than happy to have a conversation with you about this topic and to see if I can help you in any way around this topic. Other than that, I hope you'll join me next week, same time, same place. And until then, I hope you have an amazing week. That's it for another episode of the Authentic Awakening podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you found it helpful, I'd love to hear from you. You can do that by liking and subscribing to my YouTube channel or rating and reviewing the podcast wherever you're listening.